Hey guys, National Chess Master Jonathan Hilton here. Today I have a special treat on my channel. I'm going to be looking at a game of Chaturanga, as it's called on chess.com, or shatranj, as most serious players of this game call it, between I am Eric Rosen and GothamChess. That's Levi Rozman, who has big YouTube channel on chess with over, I think, 1 million subscribers now. This is a game that they played quite a while ago, a few years ago. You can tell that it's an old game because at that point, chess.com actually had the king on the current modern starting square, and it had these guys with kind of the weird bishop-y shape as the elephants. But the basic way that this game works is it was played over 1,000 years ago, very popular in the 800s AD, 900s AD, mostly in the Arabic world. The goal of the game was to capture the king. Shatranj is just ancient Persian for checkmate. So the king was called the Shah, and the goal of the game was to capture the king or to take all of the opponent's pieces, or simply to stalemate the opponent. So there were multiple ways to win. There's no castling. The pieces move more slowly. Rooks, knights, and kings move just as they do in regular chess. The pawn pretty much moves like it does in regular chess, except it doesn't move 2 squares on its starting square. It just goes 1 square at a time. And it can only promote to this piece, which is called the furs or furzan or vizier or wazir, depending on what language in the ancient world you spoke. But the basic idea is that it's the visor or the advisor to the king, and it just moves 1 square diagonally. So it's kind of like the world's most short-range bishop. Can only move 1 square at a time. Captures normally, and then the other piece that's a little bit tricky is this guy, the elephant, sometimes called the alfil. But it is a very limited piece, and it simply jumps 2 squares over any piece in any direction along these diagonals. So it's basically like also a very weak kind of bishop, but it jumps and it just goes 2 squares. So the important thing to know about the elephants is that they're incredibly weak because each elephant can only move to a very limited number of squares on the board. In fact, each elephant is basically limited to, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares. That's just an important thing to know and to keep in mind, is that these elephants, they can move to so few squares that they're great like supporting piece, they're great for attacking, but they're basically in some positions just worth less than a pawn. Okay, so with that, let's get started. First move by Rosen is perfectly good, and then GothamChess opens with the elephant coming out. This is a little bit early. Shatranj is one of those games where you want to lead with the pawns. The strategy is to get all the pawns up, get all the pawns out first. It was much like just a regular ancient battle. You'd send your infantry out first. And that's because the pieces are comparatively weaker. So there's no 4-move checkmate. In fact, the rooks and the knights are the major pieces, and they start the game sidelined. So you want to bring out those pawns first. So I don't particularly like this move because it's going to block the H-pawn, and it's a little early to try to commit this piece yet. Okay, and then we see copycat strategy. Again, better to hang back with this piece because we don't know where it's going to go. Send the pawns out first. When you've got this pawn all the way up on e4, then maybe you're going to want to bring that elephant to e3. So knight to f6, again, typical strategy, bring the pawns out first. It would make more sense to run the f-pawn up and then play knight to f6, kind of like a Dutch. But then d3 is a good move. Just control the center. c6, knight d2. I'm perfectly happy with this move rather than the more active knight c3. The reason I like knight d2 is because we're leaving space for the c pawn to come up, and it gives us a way to develop the furzan. Okay, I like this, bringing the Fursan up. This is good. G3 is probably fine. You can afford to spend a few more tempi doing just kind of like moves to get pawns up, even if they're on the side of the board. It's not such a big deal in this game. Knight to a6, I have a feeling this knight's going to be misplaced. Um, I, my guess is that GothamChess here eschewed the more natural looking knight bd7 just because he maybe didn't think that, oh well, you know what, this elephant can jump over the knight anyway, so it makes sense to play knight bd7, run the e-pawn up, and then this elephant can develop this way. That would be a much more natural way to play. But okay, instead we're seeing knight to a6, bishop h3. You know, no need to put this on uh, such a decentralized square. If you look at this structure, right, and you're thinking strategically in terms of, okay, where is black going to be weak and what is a viable long-term plan, you notice that with a pawn here and the knight here, there's going to be room for this pawn to come to b5. So a much more natural way to play. So what we would see in you know, game probably between you know, two of the really high-rated players for shatranj on chess.com. So for reference, I think I'm currently number 4. I have been number 1 at different points. You'd want to see d4, and then after something, you know, kind of normal like e6, probably bring this guy up. And then the plan would be to play c3, b3, rook b1, c4, and then eventually you're going to get b4, b5 in. And so we're going to create this whole pawn storm on that side of the board. And given how these pieces are placed and the c7 square is not readily available for this knight, black is going to have to find some kind of precise moves in order to defend. Probably he's going to have to find something like d5, Fursan to d6, knight to c7, b6, a6 to take some space, but it's going to be a little bit passive. So, of course, if you don't like that plan, the fact that this elephant's been developed this way also gives you the possibility of playing rook g1, g4, and g5, which is a totally viable plan. That would be another pretty normal way to see this game develop. All right. Okay, rook g1, he finds it. Very good. This is going to be a pretty normal plan, just to march a wing pawn down, take advantage of these kind of loose guys. Knight to g4, interesting and fun little creative resource. Ultimately, though, this probably isn't going to be so great. I love knight to f1 because it's defending these two spaces, and white's just getting ready to play f3, f4, and then g4, g5 is going to be unstoppable. So white's going to gain a lot of space here. Yeah, I think knight g4, we're seeing sort of the breakdown of black wishes that he had gained some space first before developing this knight to f6. So knight to f1, knight e5. Okay, this is clever. Wow. All right, so we're we're seeing here some of the disadvantage maybe in just some of the like technical move order stuff that has been a little bit off. Yeah, white's gonna be forced to go back with knight d2 because the f3 square is just a problem. b6. Okay, well, if black had continued to repeat this way, you know, and harass this pawn on h2, probably white's just going to play rook to g2, and because white's probably a little better and doesn't want to make a draw, just given the bad position of the knight on a6. And we want to play f3 with white. The problem is this e3 pawn. White really should have hung back with this elephant. The elephants are great on their starting squares because they protect the center, and that would allow this. It's going to be a little bit long-winded, but probably the right idea is going to be to bring the bishop back to c1, or elephant, excuse me, and then play f3, and then we see g4, g5 with good effect. But yeah, both players are being a little awkward with the pieces, which is totally normal. I mean, it takes a little while to get the hang of these shatranj pieces. Okay, d4. All right, white's going to have a clear advantage now. Yeah, and then g4. This is looking good. This is looking really good. Knight to h4. Okay, there's a lot of knight moves here. It's not looking like there's a much of a plan in the works for black. And then g5. Yeah, bishop to f8. I mean, that seems pretty natural. Elephant coming back to f8. Yeah, probably black doesn't want to allow takes and takes, which kind of wrecks the pawn structure. That's not to say it's not playable. It's probably entirely possible to just go ahead and play some move like e5. Uh, it looks a little weird, but the idea would be, okay, something like takes, takes, and then maybe king e7, bishop comes up, or elephant sitting on the e6 square, and then swing the rook over, and just try to play for the g file. But that's it's kind of an awkward way to play, and black's going to have some structural disadvantage. So elephant f8 makes sense. Okay, pawn to c3. This is all pretty good. All right, d5. The players are kind of gravitating towards some normal play because now this elephant's going to find a better home. First hand comes up. That looks good. Centralize the first hand. f3 looks good. c5. Yeah, pretty normal. Of course, it's going to cause this pawn to be a bit targeted. But black has to do something to try to get a little activity, a little control of the center. Pawn to f4. Yeah, I don't mind this. The e4 square isn't really a weakness because this first hand is always going to be coming up to d3. Note that it is possible, though, if white wants to prevent pawn to c4, just sink the first hand onto d3. And the idea in these kinds of structures is if pawn to c4, two centralized pawns is probably those are probably going to be better than that first hand, which is just basically a short range bishop. Better to get a couple of good central pawns, and then the pawns are really going to start rolling. And white ends up getting just a really nice, well-centralized position here. So that's an alternative way to go, but f4 isn't bad. Pawn to c4. Yeah, I mean, black's got to do something to gain space. The c4 point is going to be hammered by b3, so it's a little hard to recommend too much. For black, the problem is going to be getting this elephant on c8 out. The problem is knight to b8 followed by knight to d7 or knight c6, which is what black really wants to play, is going to hang the c5 pawn because of takes, takes, and this elephant jump. And notice this guy is not a guy who can recapture. He can only go here or here. So it's a little bit, black's position is a little bit problematic. Maybe instead of c5, the right thing to do is to just reroute the knight first and then go c5. And that's at least going to leave the possibility, say, of this elephant developing out to a6. All right, so c4, rook g4, seems natural enough, although it is kind of helping. Oh, this is a huge blunder. All right, so this is our first major, decisive moment of the game. Remember, elephants are worthless. Elephants are absolutely worthless in this game, and knights are a major piece. So what that means is white at this point can just snap off the knight, and then after e takes, and then just move the rook anywhere, maybe just rook g3, or it could just be, maybe just bring it back to g1. This position is like a trivial win now for white, because all you have to do is play knight g3, attack this h-pawn. It's going to force black to play g6. And then you just play king f2. You run the h-pawn down, and you double on the h-file. Basically, black is going to be really struggling to get counterplay. And white is up an entire knight for an elephant. So that's basically like the equivalent of being up at least 2 or more pretty good pawns in chess. Or it's a bigger advantage than being up the exchange. So those end games, when the rooks come off, are going to be completely won for white. So those are pretty trivial wins. but instead of snapping this off, we see the move knight to f3, which is a blunder back because, okay, knight takes e3 now is going to be devastating. That forks the rook and the Fursan. And when the rook moves away, then just knight takes c2 is going to be your classic beginner's knight fork in regular chess. So knight takes e3, big missed win there for black. Note that knight takes e3 is usually not possible in shatranj, in that the elephant is usually, when good players are playing, remaining on c1 just to guard this point, particularly if white's going to be setting up this kind of stonewall structure where he really needs this e3 point to be guarded. So, that is that's a missed win. And then after b5, let's see if white finds this and plays something like king to f2. Let's see. Yes, king to f2. Okay, and the opportunity is gone. Of course, bishop takes f5, still wins. But okay, so king f2, h6. All right, rook on g to g1. Again, if white isn't going to be taking, then that seems pretty normal. Okay, and here white finds it. All right, here we go. So e takes, rook takes. So this is now a pretty trivial win for white. And so pawn to g6 and rook to h1. All right, white finds it. White is playing the good plan. And black's days are going to be numbered here. Elephant e6, pawn to h3. This is great. Okay, elephant to g4. Tricky move, taking advantage of the fact that this is not an option. But nothing to worry about. Oh, okay. So remember, the knight was being threatened, but I'm not sure that bringing the knight back this way is the solution here. So let's just take a minute to think about this, right? Because black with this move has created a really tricky situation, and that is so okay. Knight to g3 is the natural move. Basically, getting h takes g4 back is a possibility because the knight defends the rook. But the tricky idea here for black is to try to trap this rook. So f6 would be the follow-up. And then rook takes g6 and king to f7. And this rook is trapped. So that's going to be a problem. Just looking at this to see if there's anything white can do. This is looking pretty nasty. g5 is covered, h6 is covered. So there's not a good way to support the rook. So probably rook takes g4, maybe just sort of a desperado, get as much material as you can. And we head for this endgame. So where would we be here? So white is going to have 2 pawns and a knight for a rook. And then let's count the other pieces. We're going to have an elephant and then a Fursan. Okay, so this position is okay for white. So, white has 2 pawns for the exchange, and he's probably going to launch this knight into a really good square on f5. Meanwhile, there's only one open file for the rook, and white can probably place a king on g2 or something to cover that. Black's going to have to work a little bit to try to open another file. So that's going to be okay for white, but yeah, it is unfortunate. This bishop to g4 with the idea of f6 trapping the rook is actually a really good idea. So looking at that, yeah, when the elephant comes to e6, okay, white should just go back, and then he can just prepare his plan and trade off everything on the h file and enjoy in the endgame being up a knight for an elephant. But okay, so elephant to g4, knight g1, b4, and oh wow, and then we see takes, and then h4. The problem with this here is, again, f6, attacking this rook. Rook has to take, king f7. Okay, and then I guess the idea is h5. So that looks like a really, really nice defense for white that just keeps him in play. Looking at this, maybe black has to find a way to attack this rook again. Maybe there are maneuvers to get there, but that's going to take some time. And in the meantime, maybe white is going to find a way to get himself out of this. Well, and plus the e7 square, white can always sink this elephant into c5 and guard it. So it's not at all clear that black has a good way to approach the rook on g6. So yeah, so after takes and h4, it looks like the opportunity to play f6 is largely passed. It would have had to have been done here, I guess, with f6 takes and king to f7. So yeah, okay, and then this position is probably gonna that looks like it's gonna be a problem for white, losing that rook. So okay, so we see some really daring play. The moment passes when f6 was maybe going to work. Oh, knight to e2, and all right, and this gives all the material back. Gives the material back. I think here was the moment white has the chance to play h5, so he should just go for it. Realizing, okay, it's a little bit awkward with the pawn on b2. Understandably, white wants some counterplay. But if the elephant ever comes to d6 or whatever, then just pawn to b3 takes, and then this, this Furzan is going to be really good. It's going to anchor here, and there's not going to be any counterplay along the b file. And the b file will just almost never open because black is going to have to find a way to get the pawn to a4 in order to do that. And with knight on a6 still out of the game, that's going to be pretty hard. And in the meantime, white's crashing through on what we would call the Shah side, the side where the Shah begins. There's the Shah side and the Furzan side, just like there's the king side and the queen side in modern chess. So, okay, knight to e2, this gives the material back. So black is doing fine on material now, and then elephant to d6, love this move, just getting a little counterplay, getting a little pressure. Oh, and then we see pawn to h5. This is not going to work out because black can play rook takes b2 here. Remember, this does not guard this. And that would threaten the Furzan. Maybe the king has to come up, but then knight b4. Black is just going to pile on. Remember, this can't take it, and jumping here doesn't take it. So, so that's problematic. Of course, the players look like they're extremely, extremely low on time here. So, playing the first moves that come to mind. Okay, knight goes into d3. Yeah, the tables have definitely turned here. Black is winning because he is crashing through on the b2 square. h6 looks pretty desperate. There's not a lot of point in trying to promote this pawn. It's only going to become a Furzan, which is not very powerful. King to d7, that's fine. h7, that's fine. Rook on b to e8, I don't love it because really it would make more sense to take. If knight d2, then c3, this is going to pin that knight. And then if, say, king to d1, just rook takes Furzan with check, and that skewer is going to be ridiculous. The elephant can interpose, but just takes, and takes. So some missed opportunities here. Rook on b to e8. The idea, though, just to crash through this way or this way because the e-pawn's pinned. Knight to e5 looks like a good defensive try. Yeah, and I think this is going to get tricky because black's advantage is evaporating a little bit after knight to e5 check. Yeah, ooh, king goes back. This is going to get really dicey. I think it makes more sense to just take. If you play takes, it doesn't really matter that you give up this. You can just give up the elephant for the pawn and retake with a Furzian or the king. Um, the e-pawn is going to be worth more than the Furzian, or more than the elephant is, particularly at this stage in the game. Yeah, just rook b8 there, and then take on b2. Black's looks like black's still winning this pretty handily. But yeah, king to c8, it cuts off the rook's maneuver to b2. So just takes, king takes. Yeah, Frisian into b6. Well, and so at this point, if we kind of take stock of the position, amazingly, things are more or less equal on material. In fact, I think white's up a pawn. And white's emerged with a safe king and a nice set of pawns in the center, and possibility of anchoring this elephant on the good c5 square. Note that Furzian takes if the white elephant does come in, like let's say, oh, and we see it in the game, white plays elephant to c5. So for instance, taking is not a good idea because the Furzian can move to half the squares on the board, whereas the elephant can only move to like 7 or 8 squares. So the Furzian is worth a lot more than the elephant. Plus, it opens up the way for king to d4. And white is going to dominate the dark squares. So king to b7, Furzian in makes sense, although probably the big objective is going to be to try to anchor this this elephant. It's a little bit hard to do. White's maybe not quite in time. He can't play b3, b4 because this elephant is going to take, and black is going to play rook c8 next move, at which point taking this way and then taking the pawn becomes maybe a playable idea. So Furzian up here, and then okay, rook to c1. Well, it drops the h pawn, so all right, so that's probably giving up white's winning chances, because it looks at this point like white's back in the game. If I had this position and I wanted to play this for a win, I'd probably consider just sacrificing the elephant for this pawn. Creates 2 connected passers, and white continues to have good pressure here. So maybe just this, and then maybe reroute this rook, maybe here or to g2. And the idea would be, get some kind of rook on the c file, and then start to try to push these pawns up the board. This Furzian can come to try to control any squares that are weak or left behind. So, maybe not the world's like strongest winning plan. Things are starting to look really drawish. But I think after this, like black is now back in the driver's seat because of the open H file. So, yeah, this is rook h3, threatening to just take on f4 because the e pawn's pinned. This is problematic. Oh, b3, yeah, just allows takes. So this is starting to get pretty problematic. Rook e2, the e pawn didn't have to be defended. There's no reason to defend it. The elephant is doing a great job guarding it. So, maybe white should just continue to kind of play this plan of at least trying to push on the Furzian side. Rook e2, rook e8, rook e1. Again, no need to protect this pawn. It is, well, I mean, I guess there's a need to guard it a little bit because the Furzian could sack here, but at the moment there are 3 pieces defending it, and this piece does not attack it. So there's no need to continue to guard that pawn. White can instead focus on trying to use this 2-to-1 majority for something. Rook e4. Yeah, I mean, why not? The Furzian will kick it out at some point, but for now, white has to find a bit of a way to reshuffle to get there. Yeah, bishop d6 like that, attack this pawn, a3, a6. Furzian here, maybe that's the right approach, but just king c3 followed by bringing the Fursan up to the center would kick out this good rook, so that might be a try. And then f4, yeah, I like that move. Just continuing to undermine. Here takes. Okay, a bit of a spite check. Takes. All right, and yeah, so here, I think here's where this is starting to get a little too drawish for black. In this position, taking here is a big mistake, because even though black is up a couple of pawns, in shatranj that's not necessarily going to be enough to win, because they're only going to promote to Fursans. So you want to keep a little bit more material on the board, even if you're maybe just up a couple of pawns. So the winning plan for black here is going to be to play f3. If you play f3, then you're going to keep 2 connected passed pawns and a huge space advantage. So rook to f2, for instance, now you just play g5, rook g1, meet it with g4, and then this pawn is going to come up to f5. And the hope is going to be to try to push these guys at some point at a good moment, just roll them down the board. And if you keep the rooks on the board and you get that kind of space advantage, remember the rooks are like the most powerful piece in this game. So if there's a situation where we can play g3, force this rook from f2, and maybe we're in a good position to play rook h2 ourselves, maybe this rook has come around and you can think about doubling along the second rank. That is how we get to our checkmating positions in this game. So I think after f takes e3, it's going to be a draw. Still maybe some winning chances for black, but that looks really drawish. f3 would look pretty decisive. I mean, still chances for white to draw, but f3 is going to be the decisive move. So takes, check. Here, yeah, and when the rooks come off, this is not looking promising for a win. We're going to have an opposite colored Fursan endgame. And remember, the bishops, actually, the elephants, they can never capture each other. Just because of the starting squares that they are on, they go to different sets of squares. So opposite colored Fursan endgame, that's kind of like an opposite colored bishop endgame in modern chess. So, and the Fursan drop. So now this is now definitely just a draw. Yeah, I see no hope, because black can just sink his king here, and the Fursan will go back and forth. And there's no way that, I mean, maybe white can find a way to get his king in somewhere and play fe6, try to take the d5 pawn. But as long as black keeps the king here and the Fursan here, that's going to control most of the approaches to d5. So, yeah. So after the elephant drop, that's going to be a draw. Black's best winning try, probably come back, and then, maybe if white plays like king to f3 to go after these pawns, you probably play f6, just keep all of these squares guarded. And then I'm thinking sacrifice the elephant for a pawn here and get the king into b5. This is going to create a situation where black is going to have at least 3 passed pawns, and the prospect, if those all promote to Fursans, then that's going to be enough to probably get a decisive material advantage. Remember, all you have to do is take all of your opponent's pieces in order to win. You don't have to achieve a checkmate. So yeah, best try for black is going to be elephant here, pawn up, and king comes in. I would think that white should be able to hold a draw. The drawing plan there is probably just sink this Fursan onto a4, and the idea is, after takes, king c6, there's not an easy approach to get up to break through on this side. Black does have a couple of passed pawns, so he'll try to push that way. White will probably play b5 at some point. These pawns will probably come off. And since it's opposite colored furs hands, White's going to try to set up a blockade of some kind on the light squares. But there are winning chances here for Black, because whenever you have two pawns, and this d4 pawn is not rock solid, that is a pawn that could come off. So yeah, so there's some winning chances, but this is now toast. This is we're the train is pulling into draw station at this point. So yeah, we see some maneuvering. Well, king h5 actually looks like a mistake because king f5 is possible. And actually now the d4 pawn falls. So remember, this elephant doesn't guard it. So yeah, actually that looks like a mistake. Is it fatal? Maybe not. Fursan comes up to try to guard these squares. So king then comes up. Now we see this here. Well, and then f5. Yeah, that looks problematic for White. Yeah, so actually I think there's a blunder there, just allowing the king in. White can just keep the king posted. It's hard for Black to play pawn to f5 because a g5 pawn falls. Like, so for instance, you could just play here. f5 is gonna lead to this. But in order to protect this pawn, Black can't really get the Fursan around anyhow. That's just not going to work because it gets snapped off. And then this is actually maybe White's now going to win. Yeah, White's probably going to win that. So let's see, fd6. Yeah, so king h5, big blunder. Yeah, White should probably just continue to play this, and the party, Black's just going to start alternating. And if White's really trying to play this for a win, I guess one idea would be to play elephant back here, target the g5 pawn, sacrifice the elephant for these two pawns, and then that's going to leave White up one pawn. He's going to have opposite colored Fursan in game, and then he's going to have one pawn, one extra pawn. It's not enough to win typically, though, opposite colored Fursan in game. So but yeah, big blunder. Oh, and this is fatal. This is fatal. f5. Ooh, fatal again. King g6. This is some time scramble. But yeah, this retreating the Fursan is fatal because elephants are worth nothing. And the Fursan is like the best that we have. So this here is this is completely winning for White now, because I mean, any old move, just drop this back is Zugzwang. Yeah, Black can't allow this because White's going to clean house. So so here this is fatal. And so for instance, we could just see takes, and then I mean, king to g6 is one move, but something simple could just even be here, and then king g6. So the g pawn stopped, the f pawn that's just going to drop, and Black's going to be in Zugzwang. This king comes back, then White's going to run the Fursan up, take away the e6 square, and then the f6 pawn drops. So chance here for Eric Rosen to take the day. But f5, king g6 here. All right, and so now we're probably getting back into draw territory. Yeah, because the chance has been missed. All right, White's going to run with a passer, but Black now has a couple of passers. So this is really starting to look fine. Okay, elephant coming back. Good defensive try, and then g2 makes sense. Takes and takes. little bit of a tenuous position for white, just because this first hand is better than this elephant. We see b7. Yeah, and then first hand to e5. This looks good. It's just sort of like a nice winning try. It's kind of a chance to bamboozle the opponent. D takes e5, not forced. White can probably also just promote. Well, but then takes here is going to be a really big issue. So yeah, so d takes e5 probably forced. d4, kind of like it. It's a little edgy. I mean, king takes and king up. You know, that's another route. But okay, d4. Just going elephant hunting here. d3, b8 first hand. And we just want to be very precise here. This is kind of a study-like position, because the king can often trap the first hand in these kind of endgames. So white comes back to c7 with the idea if the first hand anchors here on d6, it's just a draw. Because, okay, black maybe gets this first hand, but that's going to be a light squared first hand, and these are dark squares. And the pawn and the first hand defend each other, so that's a draw. Yeah, king d5, this is just going to be maybe a draw now. But king takes e5 is a way to play. The question is, can we save this first hand? The approach is going to be king e6, king d7, force it back, and force it back again and take it. So king to f7 is forced here because white has to find a way to run the king in. And then probably what we see here, we see king in. That black would switch gears and try to trap this elephant. Let's take away the e3 square. King to e6 probably. King here, threatening king to f2, trapping the elephant, but there is nothing at all that white can do about that. He's just going to let the elephant go. We see here, king e4. Black has to be careful here because takes is just going to run into king to e3, promote the first hand, and then king d2 traps this first hand again, and so then this is just going to be a draw. So if black wants to keep some winning chances, rather than king takes g1, he's probably going to play. He's got to play first hand promotes. But here there's a chance you just play bishop to e3. This and the bishop is going to perpetually cover the g1 square. So g1. So then this is this is going to be a draw here. Just opposite colored first hands by themselves on a lone board. So okay, so it looks at first sight at least that okay, after d2 fc7, if black plays a more precise king takes e5, that there is starting with king f7, there is still a route for white to hold a draw here. Yeah, everything's getting a little edgy. Note too, black could, rather than playing d2, he could just go ahead and trap this first hand. He can play king back. But after here, okay, white can force black to lose a bit more time. E6, d2, e7. Like black hasn't proved anything here. Because white is able to promote that e-pawn. So that doesn't get anything for black. Makes me think here, maybe starting with king takes e5 and then playing king to e4 or something of that nature. Maybe there was a more precise path, but very difficult. And of course, the players are too low on time to be able to calculate anything. But king d5 should just be met by first hand to d6. That's going to be a draw. King to f6 also fine. Here. Okay, all right. Well, and the question is, can we get anything out of this? No. So king to f2 just traps this elephant. So after, say, king here takes, king here, this, or whatever, then just king f1, g1. That's going to be a draw. Each side's going to have 2 first hands. But okay, king to e2, not quite seeing the direct approach on the elephant. And oh, okay, all right. Well, and it makes sense. This endgame here, actually, there's a lot of endgame studies on this, with the 2 first hands against 1. Um, a, a, a lot of times this is actually going to be a win for the stronger side, because all you have to do is take off this pair of first hands. And yeah, there were some studies done in like the 800s AD that involve basically some very weird opposition. Like you take some weird opposition with a king, and then you run your king around to the other side, and it forces a first hand back, and you get some sort of trade-off and draw. So I think there are actually chances with takes. And certainly that's going to be unpleasant for black to defend. But here, with just the extra elephant, I mean, this should end up being a draw. I kind of prefer this and this, maybe just get black into a little more central position, but okay. Yeah, so far this is okay, right? Yeah, and that makes sense, because if we exchange off this last pair, having the extra elephant is not going to be enough. Black can't trade the last pair of pieces because of the bear king rule. If all of your pieces are taken, you lose. But black ought to be able to just continue to shuffle and avoid those trades. So we see this. I think I would centralize the king. I'm not sure that yeah, there we go. Just kind of doing a blunder check to see if there's anything that was missed. King to e3 actually looks. King to e3 looks a lot better here, because, like, let's say that first hand comes back, then king to f2, followed by king here, and trap this first hand. So black would actually have to play first hand to g2, then king to f2 happens. So this first hand comes up. Oh, and here white has a forced win. Just here, threatening to take this guy, so you have to exchange, but then the first hand is mated, as we say, in the corner. And then after takes and takes, all of the pieces are gone. And that is considered a win for white. I'm told that maybe at the time this was played, there was a bug on chess.com where it would actually register some of those like bear king positions as being draws rather than wins. I know for the longest time, king and knight versus king, there was a bug on chess.com where they called it a draw. But okay, yeah. So yeah, I think king to e3. This is probably decisive, and black needs to keep the king and the first hands together. So maybe just fg2 here, or even king here and king here. That's going to keep it a draw. But okay, here's what we see. Yeah, these pieces are getting pretty dangerously separated. Yeah, at this point, white has to be winning at this point. But all right, fd5 is kind of losing the thread of it. Just bishop back and king e3, trying to mate the first hands. This first hand's going to drop. It's too far. It's too disconnected. So, for instance, king c2, here, king to f2, right? Threatening king g2 and just take this guy. Black tries to defend by holding the g2 square, but here just fg3, force this, and then take. So yeah, so the pieces are becoming a little bit too separated, but it doesn't look like white is seeing that as a possibility. It looks like he's trying to play for a mate, which makes a certain amount of sense. Yeah, okay, and this Furzian's escaping its position in the corner. But let's see if we find anything else. Ooh, drops this elephant. Probably just takes. The question is, does white have anything? Like king e3 trying to mate this Furzian, but looks like just king d1. King d1 ought to hold the position together. White wants to try to approach this Furzian, so king here with this idea. Black has to be careful. He wants to run the Furzian the right way. If he goes here, king to f4, this looks a little bit suspect. So that guy's going to drop. So maybe bring the guy this way. King to e4, still trying to achieve this Furzian mate. King here, king here. Yeah, this Furzian's maybe going to end up mated. Because here we see this maybe with this idea, but white can always just block and then take. So and then we get into that 2 Furzians versus 1 that I mentioned. That there's a lot of studies just done from like really old times on that. I think there's a famous one called Asuli's Diamond. That was a really big puzzle. I think Asuli's Diamond has to do with 2 Furzians versus 1. Okay, so we get here, yeah, and maybe taking loses because this guy's too isolated. But okay, goes back. Yeah, king to e3 though, like the king really had to stay to guard the Furzian. So white should have a way to win this. Ooh. Kind of weird here. King to b3 trying to take this guy. King to e3 taking this guy. So yeah, it's a little bit dicey. A little bit dicey for black. Here, check. Probably, yeah, just king here and king here is probably the way to go. But of course, this guy, yeah, this guy drops. But the idea is, like here, then here. So that's going to get a little bit interesting. Yeah, black is going to have to be really precise to hold. I think going back to try to just save this guy is the way to go. Yeah, white should probably be thinking about trying to set up a mating net. Here, king c3. Oh, check, and then king to c4. Ooh, yeah, just takes here, wins. That's devastating. King to c4 here, right? Going in, I guess, threatening this guy. If we're playing bear king rule, and again, I don't know what chess.com was at the time, but on the bear king rule, just takes here, and then here, whatever. Like this would have been considered a win. Although the way that the interface is, it's not flagging it as a win. So maybe chess.com didn't recognize the bear king rule at the time. So that's important. Because it's going to make it really hard to win without bear king rule. So here, yeah, I'm pretty sure the players like have no idea at this point that if white just has like king and Furzian versus king, it's considered a win for the side with a Furzian. So that must not have been the rule at the time. Here, although yeah, if we're playing for mate, probably the right idea is king c3. Hoping to just sort of like completely box black in. So here there's actually a really nice move, right? So okay, so the win here, right, is going to be king c3. If here, then we just go this way, and we're going to pick off this Furzian. and black, I don't think black has any serious counterplay, right? So king b3 or whatever, just play here. It's defended by the elephant. And then, okay, if he comes out this way, we just play here. If he goes back, we just drop the elephant down here. And again, we're like continuing. Oh, but if there's no bear king rule, then actually maybe takes here, because this is not mating material. It's winning material, but it's not mating material. So yeah, interesting. But yeah, the idea with king c3, it would be that this and this loses for black, so you have to play Furzan in, and now you have this move bishop to or Furzan to a3. It's defended by the elephant, but black is in Zug here. His king has 0 moves, and then here runs into this, and then here. This is oh, it flags stalemate as a draw. That is impossible. It's going to be impossible to win if stalemate's a draw. No, stalemate is a win for white, or stalemate is a win for the stalemating side. That's going to make it so hard to win. So I guess you just accept that you're up a piece and you play something like this, and you hope that you can get a mate. That's. But yeah, so here, and then of course here, and since stalemate is a draw in the way that the interface was set up at the time, that's tricky. You have to go back. But you may be able to achieve a mate from here. Like from here you can achieve a mate, right? Because this then just takes, it's guarded, and the mating plan is going to be to play here, 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 and you have to be careful not to stalemate with this, but then you play here, here, and this is your mating net. So there's chances for white. White might still be able to finagle a checkmate with king c3, but it's going to be really hard. So first hand back here, king to b5. All right, this is, yeah, we're getting pretty drawish, but here runs into that. So okay, yeah. So let's see if there's anything interesting from here, but it looks like the players have kind of straightened out any issues. Yeah, I mean here, takes, and this would be your try, and at least now you're going to try to avoid the 50 move rule. If there's no bear king rule and stalemate is a draw, then I don't see any way to win. But like in regular shatranj, those rules have all been straightened out on chess.com now. Whew. Yeah, so there's going to be just a lot. There's just going to be a lot here. Yeah, and all right, 50 move draw rule. So yeah, I mean the last chance maybe to avoid the 50 move draw rule was when white had the chance to play takes fd3. So the question is, can we win even without having stalemate as a win or the bear king rule as a win? So king b2, king here, Furzan here, right? How can we win this? Maybe we try this. Keep all of these squares covered. Here, and then what's the approach? Like Furzan here, but then this, check, and then back. Here, Furzan up this way, just Furzan here. Furzan here, and the king escapes. Or, I mean, maybe just this. So, yeah, all right. So without those rule tweaks, there's nothing. But anyway, very entertaining game. It was great to see, these two strong players playing